overnight, March, like everything's normal, to like 100% of the bookings canceling within a few days, like both at our property in Sonoma and in Kauai. So I went home, even though we had no bookings, I just like doubled all the rates. What kind of got us to the next level was I found these weird things in New Mexico, in Taos, New Mexico, called Earthships.
Would you recommend, if me and my wife work full time, is this something that we can do on the side and invest in and operate relatively well, or would you advise against it and just travel as people travel and invest in the S&P? My name is Omar Morales. I'm a commercial real estate broker that's closed over $3 billion worth of deals in South Florida. This gives me access to some of the most prolific real estate deal makers in not only South Florida, but also the country. My goal with the Real Estate Deal Makers podcast is to keep the conversations timely and current so you have a better understanding of where the market is today, and more importantly, where the leaders of this industry think it might be tomorrow. So let's dive into today's conversation. My conversation today is with Rohin Dhar. He is a fellow Twitter friend and someone that owns and operates vacation rentals in Sonoma, Yosemite, Asheville, Hawaii, and other cool places. Today, we talk about how feasible owning and operating Airbnbs actually is as the industry gets more professional and more institutionalized, what to look out for and what to watch out for in markets and in specific deals. And interestingly, what has changed since he started in 2014 to where the industry is today? Here's my conversation with Rohin. Rohin, I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Absolutely. So obviously we met through Twitter. I see you tweeting a lot about short-term rentals. I've got a great following. And I guess what I'm curious about, and I think what a lot of people will be curious about too, is how did you go from 0 to 1 as it relates to starting the business?
So it was 2014, and my wife and I had just gotten married, and we lived in San Francisco, and it was like, okay, we had a 1-year-old baby, and we're like, should we try to buy a house? And like, really realistically, like, we weren't that successful to like buy a house in San Francisco, even though like almost all our friends were. So I kind of like knew about this Airbnb thing, and I kind of liked fooling around with Zillow and looking at prices. So we were up in Sonoma, California. It's just an hour away from San Francisco, and there was a house for sale there that we ended up buying, but it was roughly around $470,000 for a house, 3-bedroom house with a pool. And I was like, this makes no sense. Like, this is an hour from San Francisco. It's way nicer up here. It's Sonoma. It's like a great place to visit. And in San Francisco, this would be like the cost of a studio. So we were just like, we don't really know anything about real estate, but I don't know, like it just doesn't make any sense. Like, it's so nice up here and the price is so low. So we ended up just like going for it.
Did you buy it all cash, the first one?
No, like, I mean, this was 2014, and they were like, wait, so you're gonna like, like it was very confusing with the lenders and insurance and everything. And it wasn't like Airbnb was just started, but they were like, it's an investment property, but like, you're going to use it to, like, how does this work? But, we were, in the end, we were able to get like a regular 30-year loan. And subsequently it's become a lot easier, like, getting loans and things like that and figuring out the insurance. But at the time it was like, brand new almost.
Operationally, was that one like, this is our baby, I'm gonna, do everything soup to nuts for it? And has it evolved from that?
It started off that way, and it always is that way. Like, when you first buy it, like, it was easy. It was good because it was 1 hour away, so you could buy furniture locally. You could like drive it up. You could, I painted all the walls and things like that. And that would have been hard if it was on the other side of the country. But what you really quickly realize is, like, even if something's an hour away, you can't be there all the time, and it might not be helpful for you to be there if you don't know how to fix things. So it became like very, very clear very quickly that it wasn't any benefit or any detriment that we weren't actually physically there. Right. And so pretty quickly we were able to, like, we'd go up there to use it and for our own use. But like, if something went wrong, which, it turned out it would pretty frequently, we would just, realize we would have to call people.
So even with the first one that was just an hour away or so from you, you sort of
Yeah.
realized, hey, physically being here doesn't really change anything all that
Yeah, like
much.
one time we were there and all of a sudden like we hear some animal in the fireplace, like stuck in the chimney, and we spend like the whole day trying to figure out how to like get this, animal out of here. And we couldn't figure out how to do it. Like there was no benefit in us being there. And then we just called like a wildlife specialist. He put like a weird glove on, stuck his hand in there and like pulled a bird out. And he finished, he did it in 30 seconds.
You're
And
like,
then
well,
to
I
me, that
didn't
was
do
like, oh,
anything.
I provide no value here whatsoever by being here. I should have just called someone.
So how quickly did you go from the first one to the second Airbnb? And was the second one in a similar location?
It wasn't very quick at all because we were both like doing other jobs. None of them were like we weren't like printing money at our jobs. I had started a company and it wasn't going like incredibly well, but it was going like well enough. And so this one Airbnb, the one in Sonoma, it was just like this side thing that we had, and it maybe made like $2,000 a month in profit, which was like pretty good. And there would be months where I wouldn't even think about it, and my wife was kind of running it, but she wasn't like thinking about it much either. Um, and I had it in my head that this thing is going well, and the rest of the stuff I'm working on isn't going that well. But I had no plan how to get to the next one or how to get to like five, or more, which was what I wanted to do. But then, it took us maybe like 5 years of saving, and there was this house in Hawaii, on the
Wow.
island of Kauai, that I'd just been monitoring for like a year or two, and the price just kept dropping. And it was a 1-bedroom cottage with with a very like rare grandfathered in vacation rental permit. And so, 5 years later, we had enough money for the down payment. It wasn't like this was like the numbers were screaming, oh, this is like the best deal in the world, you should do this. But it was sort of this moment that was like, either if you want to take it seriously, you got to get a second property at some point. And like, building the model on it wasn't like, oh, this is going to be, we're going to print money here. It's like, we're probably not going to lose money. It's a 1-bedroom. It's Hawaii. People want to visit there a lot. And then, we flew out there, we stayed at the place, and yeah, we ended up putting an offer in for $590,000 for a small 1-bedroom cottage in Kauai that very crucially had this permit though. And I think they had originally tried selling it for like 2 years, and no one had wanted it. So
The permit was to be able to do short-term rentals?
yeah, a lot of this is like very zoning specific. So a lot of times people are interested in short-term rentals, like, oh, I want to buy a house in Napa Valley, and then like with 10 seconds of research will tell you can't actually do that. And so Hawaii is very regulated, which is kind of good in ways because people have been wanting to travel there forever, and SCRs kind of existed there for like 2 decades. So the laws are pretty clear. So we could pretty clearly know we could acquire this place, but the market wasn't really valuing the permit very well at the time.
So you had your first one in 2014, and then really your second one you said was 5 years later, so 2019, until it's like, okay, let's start doing more of these. And same thing.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that straightforward because yes, it was self-funded as it is today. And so 2019, my father-in-law, my wife's dad, is like pretty handy guy. So me and him, we flew out there for 3 weeks, like, put in a new kitchen, put in a new bathroom, repainted it. It was a 1-bedroom. So luckily this was like pretty easy within his skill set to do. And I could just like be handy enough to like run to the dump and help him carry stuff and learn a little bit. But it still wasn't like going that great, like a 1-bedroom, because you're competing against like cottages and things like that. So we decided I researched like, okay, what if we put a pool in? Like, which is kind of a nonsensical thing to do, like a tiny, cheap cottage with this 1-bedroom. Like there's literally no one builds a pool in a 1-bedroom house. And I got the quote, and it was like $50,000 or $60,000. And I didn't have the money. And I just sort of like, at this point, started learning about real estate. And I was like, well, would it be crazy if I refinanced the first property and built a pool in this other one? And so that's what we did. We like refinanced the first original one in Sonoma, used that money to basically fund the renovation, which mostly ended up being the cost of the pool and the surroundings. And then I was like, bam, okay, we're in business now. This is looking good. And then March 2020 hit, and then like everything shut down. So
No way. How long was it sort of mute or, pretty mute for you guys?
It wasn't great for us. Like it was definitely like this feeling of like, oh man, I messed up. Like I made these somewhat speculative investments and they're not going well. So like we live in San Francisco. And that and that shut down hard.
Right.
And it went from like overnight, March, like everything's normal, to like 100% of the bookings canceling within a few days, like both at our property in Sonoma and in Kauai.
Tough.
And, so we're, like just kind of plugging along in San Francisco. And then all of a sudden, the Sonoma one, bookings go to zero. The Hawaii one, bookings go to zero. We have our apartment in San Francisco, which we're paying rent on. Then my wife works in events, so her job kind of like evaporated overnight. And my job was always like kind of entrepreneurial and always flying on the seat of our pants. And I was like, wow, we're like, counting out every dollar in our bank account and like our 401ks and being like, well, how long can we last through this? Because this is like no scenario that I come up with how bad this could be. And then we just kind of like waited, and the path forward kind of revealed itself. That like Sonoma was closed for a few months, and then they sort of like reopened things. Hawaii was closed for like a year, which was terrible if you're in the tourism industry. But we found someone on Craigslist that was like, oh, I need, my partner and I, want to work remotely. And I think we rented it out to them for like $1,800 a month, which was like, a small fraction of what our carrying costs were. But they were reliable. They were, like you want someone in these buildings because they can like just get overtaken with mold or, flood or anything if they sit vacant. So it was like, okay, we stemmed the bleeding a little bit. We did some other things. We're not like hemorrhaging as much money as we thought. And then, maybe June 2020, May 2020, we like went up to Sonoma and I'm like walking around there and it's still like quiet. I'm like, this is insane. Like everyone I know is cooped up in cities. And like, here's this beautiful place.
Right.
That's just like an hour away. Like, so I went home, even though we had no bookings, I just like doubled all the rates on the one in Sonoma. Cause I was like, well, either no one's going to travel and I get zero revenue, or all of a sudden people are going to be really price inelastic because the only thing they can think of to do is stay in an Airbnb. And so I was like, well, there's no point in cutting the rates. No one's booking. So let's just double the rates. And then that's what ended up happening was that at least at this one property, like all of a sudden everyone was just like wanting to go rent this house with a pool that was only an hour away from San Francisco and near Silicon Valley. And then it started doing really well, like June 2020. And so from there, then we were like going from a position of extreme weakness to kind of like, let me like plot, like, what's our next move? And so, And so at this point, it was like, what kind of got us to the next level was, around then I was just starting, like, I'd send random emails to real estate agents selling stuff. And I found these weird things in New Mexico and Taos, New Mexico called Earthships. And they're these like very architecturally beautiful, like glass boxes that they're like half buried in the dirt, which was why they're called Earthships. And then like half of it is this glass box that like sits out in the desert. And they typically have like these beautiful mountain views. And I just found them on like Zillow or something. And I emailed a bunch of agents and some of them wrote back. And then one of them wrote me again like a few weeks later. And she's like, well, I have this one coming up across the street from where I live. It's for sale for $279,000, and it's an existing Airbnb, and it's been pretty successful. But because of COVID, it hasn't been running for a few months. The owners want to get out. Like they just want to get out. they're done. Yeah, it was like still in the time where we were kind of still getting hammered a bit, but I could tell that it was turning around. But these people were like still in that we're getting hammered mode. And so like I just like disregarded it. But then like a day later, I was like, well, let me just look at this. And it was like the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Like it was just spectacular. And then and I was like, well, you can't really get financing for this thing. It's like this weird thing. And they're like, no, you can just get regular financing. Like everyone here has like 30-year conventional loans. And so it was like this decision point. Like, do we, kind of go home with our tail between our legs about COVID, or do we just like ante up and go for this crazy Earthship in the desert? And we ended up like going for it. And then that was like really good. That was like a really good one because it didn't take that much capital. It was already good to go. And then it was just like beautiful, and people like wanted to stay there during COVID, and it was just like super capital efficient, like a high return on the cash we put out.
Amazing.
And then we're like, oh, like these little cottages that are like, 280,000 ish. You can put 20% down, and you don't have to spend a ton to fix them up. Like that I can figure out a way to buy more of. And so then like, then the next few, so then we found one like that in Mount Hood, Oregon, like, an hour from Portland at a ski resort for like 250,000.
Are these all, let me ask you a question. Are these all places that you've been to, or when you start looking for these cottages or these unique looking homes, I'm assuming you'll stay there before buying it, or maybe I'm wrong?
Yeah. I mean, we stayed at all of them before buying them. But it was like, it started off like the way I think a lot of people get into this is like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have a house here or there?
Right.
And I felt like I was hacking the system because I couldn't afford a house in San Francisco, but I could afford one like in Hawaii and Sonoma somehow. And then beyond that, though, it was more like, what are cool places that I can just like, cobble together the down payment on? Like I would have loved to buy a second one in Hawaii or Sonoma, but by then, like the prices were like, 2 or 3 times more, and the permitting was very different. So you couldn't even get a short-term rental. So it was just like, like I think I did some like I do all sorts of weird searches on Redfin and Zillow, and it turned up this one in Mount Hood. And then I run the numbers and I'm like, oh, this is like, it's very unlikely I'm going to lose money. Like when the mortgage, taxes, insurance is like $1,200 a month. And you can probably rent it for $200 a night, and it's going to be occupied because it's like a 4-season area.
Amazing.
And so it wasn't like you run the numbers and this is going to make you rich, but you'll probably eke out a profit, and it's unlikely you'll lose a lot of money. And so, yeah, but but it wasn't like, oh, I visit these places and I'm a connoisseur of Mount Hood, Oregon.
Right, right. No, I love the conviction you have and the, the due diligence that you're able to do and to be able to grab these. What I'm curious is, so you started in 2014, bought your second one in 2019, and then sort of coming out of the depths of COVID, not fully out of it, you sort of were able to see that there was light at the end of the tunnel. I'm curious, today, a lot of people, are selling the Airbnb courses, and you're like, this is how you print money and you don't have to work a day in your life. So it's brought a lot of competition to the space. Is now, when was the last time you bought when was the last Airbnb you bought? And how are you finding more opportunities today now that the market's a little more saturated?
So we bought 2 in 2021, and then 2 in 2020 and 2 in 2021. And then we were up to 6. We're up to 6 currently. End of 2021, we put an offer in on Joshua Tree, which turned out to be a very saturated market. But we ended up pulling the plug because I stayed there, and like a dog kept me up all night, and I didn't want to deal with it. So it might have saved us from like kind of going in at the top of the market. But I looked up the house later, and it turned out it's like doing well.
Okay.
And then we put an offer in another place in Arizona, like the week of closing. I think we needed like a day extra because the lender was like, missed a deadline, and then the seller just backed out. And so 2022, that was spring 2022. And then by then, like it just became clear that the rates were just skyrocketing. The price of homes by spring 2022 in these vacation areas continued to skyrocket. I don't think we had like filed our taxes yet, and so with short-term rentals, you have to you have to basically show the income on your tax returns because there's no lease. So it's hard to qualify for debt unless you've got all that. So we weren't in a position to like take on a lot of debt. And so it was like, it felt like the opportunity maybe like wasn't there after 20 of these little cottages.
Yeah.
Past like summer 2022. And so I'll say that what we do today, if someone is telling you, oh, you can get rich quick buying these places, it's very dated advice. It does not work specifically like these small properties. When you if we're buying them at 250 or 280,000 and like the interest rates are like 3.5%, or if you can even eke it out lower, it works. But it doesn't work when all of a sudden your carrying costs are like two or three times as much. So that's one thing on inside. And the other thing is like a lot of markets are way more competitive. Some of our markets are like there's a decent amount of supply of them, but other ones like they're very regulated. So it turns out some of the markets we're in, there's not much of an increase in supply. But it was always suspect advice to say like you can get rich quick doing this. Like we made a decent living so far, but it always feels shaky. Like I'm like one call away from like a leak in a roof, and then you're like, well, there goes the profits for a month, or you're like, I'm really spending a lot of time. These are like a tiny asset, and I'm spending a lot of time like dealing with a very minor issue about this one thing. Like if you were to step back and say, like, is this good advice for you to spend your time doing this? You might say like, it doesn't really make sense. So the market is definitely much harder now, but it was never something I told people, oh, you got to get in this. This is a good idea. Like there's ways to make it work, but it's not like a slam dunk good idea, even at the best of times. So.
Yeah. So once you find, let's say, okay, I'm browsing around through Zillow, I see a house, a cottage that I think I can make, okay, it's cost $300,000. I guess first step is, how do you figure out how much that cottage and that specific neighborhood and that state, how much does that make and bring in revenue? And then I want to talk operations.
So, I mean, that's something that's gotten easier over time. Is now there's like at least a few analytics sites that you can kind of get a halfway decent estimate about it. But that said, also, like, before I dive into those, like, you can just look up the Airbnb listing of a nearby property, and it tells you so much. Like, you can look like how booked is a property next door to this, and what are people saying in the reviews? Like, are people saying like, oh, there's a lot of road noise? Like there was this issue, like, oh, it's really far, this or that. And so you can get a lot of intel just by looking at nearby Airbnb listings. So that was how we did it, like before there was good analytics. But now AirDNA is a site that is in large part free, but also you can pay more. There's Rabu. There's another one called Awning. And they're basically just scraping Airbnb or Vrbo, and trying to figure out like, okay, today there was this many days on the calendar and it looks like a date got booked, and taking an educated guess of how each property is doing. And they're like directionally correct. So you can look at a place and like spend 5 minutes on the internet and get a halfway decent idea about what the revenue might be.
Right. And then for operations, are you self-managing all these properties, or do you have someone you pay 15, 20% to manage them?
So we self-manage them. So, which kind of means that like we have on the ground people that are, the house cleaner, handyman, just knowing the contacts if something breaks. And, sometimes we pay like a small fee or a more sizable one to someone to be on the ground contact. But in practice, that means that like all the guest communication goes through us, all the like pricing decisions go through us. Any issue that comes up, we're kind of responsible, and then we, just sort of triage it and send someone over locally. So it's very hard to make the numbers work, even if you have a crazy low cost basis. and are in a good market, paying the property management fee, unless like maybe it's like a huge property, like a mansion, and the economics of outsourcing it work better. So
Yeah, who's a
um,
gentleman? I'm sure maybe you've run into him, maybe not, but there's a guy on Twitter that does these huge,
yeah,
like
Mark Jenny.
Mark Jenny.
And what he's done is, like, if you're at a certain scale, he's built his own property management company that just does his properties. So he's not like in the weeds having to deal with it as a self manager, but he's like built a team that does it, and they just do their properties, and they've achieved that because they have a decent amount of scale, and they bought really good properties and can charge really high rates. But even that, like, if someone like that handed it off to like a third party property manager, the cost will be there, but also like the incentives might not be there to like really optimize your place, to like sweat every last detail. And so in his case, like I bet if you handed it to a regular property manager, they'd be like, oh, this could rent for $700 a night. And then he would say, no, we are going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to like build a track for go-karts. We're going to do this, that, or that. We're going to always be optimizing it. And we're going to charge, the market might say this is $700 a night place, but we're going to charge $7,000 a night, And so if someone came to you as a property manager, you'd be like, well, and the market is not $7,000 a night. You're just going to get average results because they're going to push you towards like what the market is saying. So if you want to do what he did, you kind of have to continually be pushing it on your own and really be involved with it. So
yeah, I almost wonder how CapEx looks in those types of properties. I guess I'll try
I think the secret is like if you bought well, like the revenue is so high, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But if you bought like a 2022 at a market price that is, I don't know, close to what the fair market value is, it might be a lot slimmer. So
yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, for him, there are these huge bets, right, on a market or a property. And I guess what's interesting is there's probably no air DNA for a $7,000 weekend in some neighborhood. But I guess once he has it, it's like, hey, this is one of one, and I'm gonna find somebody in the world or the country that's gonna want it at any given weekend.
Yeah, and I think that's like where the opportunity is today, is that like there's always an opportunity if you're one of one, even if the rates are high or this or that. There's less opportunity in maybe doing what we did, which is not like these are one of one. It's just that like I am scanning the market and I'm finding like the 85th percentile revenue property for this category, but I'm going to pay the 15th percentile price because no one else realizes that. And that's like an arbitrage a little bit. And I think, like that's just quite a bit harder to do, but that doesn't mean there's not crazy good opportunities, but you have to take either crazy risks or really be creative. So
how do the loans compare, right? Let's say you're doing 20% down or whatever it is. And obviously rates have been changing a lot lately, but I don't know if you know what the loans are today for like a short-term rental where you're putting 20% down, or maybe you can tell me how much higher is the rate compared to a, primary residential mortgage when you were doing, when you bought your last one.
It was pretty comparable to, basically there's two kinds of loans. There's conventional loans, like, that are sort of Fannie, Freddie backed, that you are, basically you are showing personal income and you can buy an investment property that way based on your ability to show income. Like if you have a high W-2 or whatever it is. And those ones, like, they're as challenging to get as a regular investment property loan today. And it's not any harder the rates aren't like necessarily different. It's just that like they really smack you on your debt to income ratio when they're evaluating you as a person, because you get hit with all the debt charges from like this property you bought, but you have no lease. So they don't say, oh, you're making this much money. So the only way they qualify your income is that it's on your tax returns. And so that's how we did it. It's just like you go slow. Is that like you got to make money, you got to file your taxes, you got to show that you're covering the debt, and then it becomes like pretty easy. Then it's like then it's just like, oh, they have real estate income, it's on the tax returns, and it far exceeds the debt, and then then you can get that. So the other kind is there are like DSCR loans. that are, but I, I get the sense it's just a fairly immature market. Like we tried using a lender one time for that, and that was the deal in Arizona, where it's just like their process just wasn't good. They missed the deadlines, and then the seller changed their mind, and because we missed the deadline by a day, the deal was done. And I have not really heard like that many great things about people doing DSCR loans with short-term rentals. But those ones are based not on your. I mean, you're on the hook for them personally, but they are not based on your. You could, in theory, I think, just get it with like very little personal income, as long as the property is doing well, and as long as the property is projected to do well.
Right.
But I think right now you can't even get any of these with like 20% down. You're looking at more like 25, 30% down for a conventional or DSCR. And, a DSCR, you might be able to pay 20% down, if you pay a lot of fees too. So
how, because I know we met through Twitter. I'm sure you've met a bunch of people on Twitter that are either interested to do their own thing or potentially wanting to invest with you. Have you considered buying something with, passive investors or a partner that's fronting the capital? And if you haven't or have, how'd that come about?
When I first got into Twitter, or when I first got into the idea, I definitely thought about it. I was like, oh, I should just raise a fund and buy these. And especially through Twitter, like I met a lot of people that are totally interested in sort of investing in something like that, as far as I can tell. But as I got into it, I was like, it's just not like a great idea because the assets are so small and it's so much work to manage them. Like I kind of think a good analogy is like these short-term rentals are kind of like having a cat. It's like awesome. You have one cat. It's like does weird stuff, but you love this quirky cat. And like six, we have six. It's like having six cats, which is like, it's a little bit weird. But like if you had 100 of them, you're like doing a lot of work to manage them. Like the HVAC on one is like this weird system, and one is leaking here, one is solar powered, one has a well. And so what we do of these sort of scattershot properties, like your life would be, it would be a lot of work to get hundreds of these when you could just buy one hotel with 100 rooms.
Right.
And so to me, I was like, I like my life now. Crossing this chasm of like using investor capital and managing, lots of them is something that like, I'm not sure it's like such a good idea. And personally, like if I were going to use it, I'd do something that was like a little more scalable. I would build something that was more hotel-like. I'd build like, 100 STRs, but they'd all be on one piece of land and they'd all be brand new and they'd all be identical. And then I'm just describing a hotel. So,
right.
I think that's part of why I got into Twitter, was just like, oh, if I share what I know about this, like there might be some opportunities. If I want to raise a fund, I could maybe. And then, and then I got into it. I was like, I don't think I want to, like, so. And I don't think I don't think it's necessarily a great idea, which doesn't say some people won't pull it off.
Right.
Like you can buy really great properties, you can do it. But like, do I personally want to do it? Like, I don't think I want to do that. Like, it has to be a really good idea for me to want to like put that on my back of like using other people's money. So
yeah, I think there's a level of stress that comes with other people's money. I think it's glorified online, but I think more to not comment on the people that have glorified it online, but I think there's a lot of stress that comes with managing other people's hard-earned money. And I also think there's similar things that have happened with people that are very bullish on just long-term ownership of rental properties, like single-family homes. And then when you start trying to aggregate them, you realize that if you have 217 single-family homes across 3 states, it is extremely hard to refine that, the operations. If you've got different investors and, management issues, leasing issues, R&M to deal with, different investor reports, it becomes a really, really tough business, I think. And to your point,
I think I've always been clear, or tried to be clear to myself, that like this strategy runs its course at 7 to 10 properties for us. And it could be that like 7 to 10 is that like you just stop there and there are these existing ones, or you trade them out to bigger properties, or you do something weird. But I don't think like what we do gets beyond like 10 unless we change what we do. And at the moment I like what we do. And when I say we, it's like my wife and me, like we both run it together. So
yeah, I think you can can start upgrading them, and maybe 15 years from now you end up with 7 to 10 Mark Jenny properties, and those are really fun.
I mean, you do that, but our biggest one is 3 bedrooms, and that's a lot more work than a 1 bedroom. Like a 1 bedroom one is, it's like a couple on their honeymoon, or just like or just a couple going away for the weekend. They're just like in a great mood. They have like no worries in life. Like you get into big properties, it's like a family reunion. Everyone's stressed. Like the money probably increases faster than the level of work, but it's not like free money the way I think people necessarily make it out to be online. Like you're dealing with more significant issues the bigger your properties are. And then the other thing is like, are you going to trade like the great interest rates you have, for ones that are just taking on a lot more risk, with higher rates, going forward. So pretty much everyone in this game is, personally guaranteeing all these loans. So, I feel really comfortable like with with the mortgages that are, $1,000 a month on these little cottages, that I could like do things to cover them. But if I was also taking on mortgages where each one was like $10,000 a month, even if it was a great opportunity, now I'm with $60,000 a month in mortgages, like I would personally like I would feel a lot more stress. So you have to right size it to how much money you have, and how much like your ability to cover things if things go south. So
yeah, and your ability to stomach risk and volatility and the income and things like that, depending on the lifestyle you want to live.
And I mean I've seen it where like our revenue will drop 90%, and it's not like some theoretical problem. Like within the last 4 years, it happened to almost everyone, at least for some time period. And in some markets it was longer, and some it was shorter. So
yeah, 100%. And I think nothing is as easy as people make it out to be on the internet, which is why I enjoy sharing this conversation where it's like, I think you said you had 6 properties right now.
Yeah. So we're about 6, and like they maybe gross maybe like 50,000 a month.
Amazing.
And if stuff doesn't break and things go well, then it's like a great, then it's like a great return on capital business. But only because we're putting in the effort, and so if you like did an honest accounting of like all the time, which isn't like a tremendous, but then the numbers start deteriorating more too. So
when you figure out the top line revenues of a property, how do you figure out the expense load when you're like sort of just projecting what this property will profit? Do you just do like a rule of thumb, 30% expense margin or 50% profit? How do you?
It's not so often that I'm like fully underwriting a property. Like you can tell pretty quickly, assuming there's not a ton of renovation you do, you can look at what you think the revenue is going to be and just compare it to the purchase price. And if it's around like 20%, like so say you buy one for $500,000 and it's going to gross 100,000, like you can kind of just know off the bat, like, oh, this is going to be a good investment. And then like I'm going to have a high return on like what my investment is. And so for us, like, if we're buying ones for 300 and I'm like, oh, I think this will gross 75, 80, it's going to work pretty well. And then I build the model and we'll like put in like all the potential expenses and everything out there. But I only need to build those models like if I'm really serious about the property.
Yeah. Typically that like a 20% rule of thumb gives you enough confidence to be like, okay, this makes sense and is worth digging into.
Yeah. And historically, at least, like you would build these models and it turned out your revenue was way more than your expenses than you thought it was going to be. And but your costs were too, but not quite as much. You're like, oh, it's like, it's costing me $200 to get the handyman out there. I thought it was going to be 50, but it turned out, I'm like getting like, $500 a night on the holidays. And I only thought I'd get like 300. And then that's, I think what's changing with competition is like your revenue is coming in around what you thought it would be, but really like before you were hoping it was going to come in more. And then your costs are coming in, depending on like, where you are, could be like substantially more than you thought it would be. So,
yeah, I wanted to ask, what have you seen? I mean, over the last, call it 12 months, it's been weird where the stock market went down in 2022 as rates were creeping up, and then interest rates haven't gone down, but the stock market's kind of ripping in 2023. I think in Miami, obviously, a lot of people talk about it on Twitter, and it's sort of in the limelight a little bit with Ken Griffin and Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
So I think Miami stays pretty full year round. Art Basel's coming
Mhm.
around, and it's pretty lively. Is that
Yeah.
the same in the markets that you're operating in, or have you seen a slowdown? And I will caveat my statement with my family, my brother and my father manage and own like 17 Airbnbs in Miami, and they've
Mhm.
seen revenues go down. I think
Yeah.
broad strokes, if they were renting a room for $200 a night, now to fill it up and stay at the occupancy that they like staying at, they need to offer it at 170 a night, right? So it's not like it's just up and to the right, but people are
Yeah.
still here. People are still spending money. How are your properties just sort of doing, and how do you see the market?
There, ours are so ours are spread out, which provides a little bit of diversification. But we're roughly even from last year. I think I'd say we're like slightly down. Like last summer, or summer 2022, we had like a banner summer, and then it was down in the summer, which is normally our best year, but it was best part of the year, but it was still like pretty good. But other than the summer, it's been pretty consistent for us. And part of it could be that like last year, 2022, I could tell we were doing really well. And so we just like took as much money as we could and like fixed up the places, like did a bunch of new bathrooms, put a new carpeting in place, added 3 hot tubs to properties. And so we might be flat-ish, but it might be that like we would be down had we not upgraded the properties.
Right.
And so, but overall, we haven't seen like a big change. And in our markets, like you see some properties that are kind of empty, but you were kind of seeing properties kind of empty even in the best of times. Like it was never like so easy that people weren't necessarily printing money where we were looking.
Right.
But then so mostly flat. And then I think your point about like, okay, even in markets that say there's more competition, more people have gotten in the game, you might have an event like Art Basel where all of a sudden like there's just so much more demand than there is supply, and that's like the nice thing about the industry is you kind of get bailed out by long weekends, huge events, the holidays. And so if you don't have like, if you have pretty good debt and you don't have you haven't gone like totally crazy,
Yeah.
it's not as scary as like maybe people might make it out online. Like, say there's a ton of properties in Austin. It's like, well, there's still like an F1 event. There's still like city limits. There's still, South by Southwest. And then like every weekend will still probably be full, at some price. And that'll get you most of the way there, assuming there's not like, crazy costs going on.
Right.
So
I'm curious. So let's say you're talking to not someone that wants to create a super scalable
yeah,
Airbnb conglomerate, but is like,
yeah,
hey, my wife and I, have dreamed about having a vacation
yeah,
home, having some excess income. I understand
yeah.
that you and your wife, do this relatively full time. Um,
Mhm.
would you recommend, if me and my wife work full time, is this something that we
Mhm.
can do on the side and invest in and operate relatively well, or would you advise
Yeah.
against it and just travel as people travel and invest in the S&P?
I generally tell people like if you can imagine yourself, if you're in a job where you're in like meetings all day and you could not possibly get out, you or your spouse, if like a guest messages you that something is happening, like it's not worth taking on this industry. It's like better to just be able to afford to maybe own it as a second home
Hmm.
or to hand it off to a property manager where you might not necessarily um make that much money, but it's enough to cover like your property taxes and insurance and utilities, but you're still like losing a bit of money unless you have a job where you can kind of just like pause and like deal with an issue. I'd say it's better to view it as a money losing thing, but something that's like awesome, and you might make money because you bought a house in Lake Tahoe and you kind of lost 30 grand a year for 10 years, but now it's worth like $5 million. And so you might actually end up making money like through a roundabout way, but you know, I would be prepared to lose the money and just like do it for like something that you just like love the area and you can afford it. So
Yeah. So basically, hey, if the intention is this is going to be some get rich quick or money printing endeavor that doesn't take too much work, like that shouldn't be the intent. If you like the area, can afford the property, and can manage to duck out of, if your work is flexible, and it's something that you
yeah,
want to take on, it's something that's doable for couples or.
yeah, I think so. You know, I, I think that's the ideal situation is like you love this area and it helps pay the costs. And the extent to which you can like turn it into a money making operation, it just requires a lot more creativity today
Yeah.
to do it.
It's wild.
I mean, just
I see the Airbnb listings,
uh,
how far they've gone, right? Like I remember looking at Airbnbs and it was a picture from a phone of the
yeah,
bed, and now it's like super HD photography, and then the wall has a wallpaper for like the kids' room, and I'm like, man, this is
yeah,
like this is gone, pretty people have gone to the other
yeah.
opposite
You
end.
got to go all in today, So
It's pretty wild.
um,
So, real quick on Twitter, because it's something we have in common. And I feel like most people that are on Twitter start lurking on Twitter and they're just like, oh, this is interesting. I follow a couple accounts, but they're sort of hesitant to start getting their ideas out there. I'm curious, how
yeah,
much have you benefited from Twitter? How much have you enjoyed the community? And how intentional
yeah.
was you growing the audience that you've grown?
Um, maybe around like, 2001, cause I live in San Francisco, I'd always like tried tech services and things like that. So I was on Twitter nominally, but didn't really use it. But I mean, 2001, I think I like discovered that people were posting about real estate and I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that. I must have found like Moses's account or Moses Kagan or Nick Huber's account. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. So I started following them. And then I think I was like, well, I can't really find anyone talking about short-term rentals here. So I'll just like, post one thing a day about this. Uh, just because it would be like fun to meet more people doing real estate. Because I'm just interested in this. I was like consuming lots of podcasts and just like interested in the topic and reading books, and it would be fun to like be part of this community. So I just started doing that. And I think for me, it's been like great in terms of it's just like kind of fun to meet like people, either meet them virtually or to even just like meet some of them in real life sometimes, or to do this. It's just like a fun thing if you're doing short-term rentals. Like I met a great crew of people through that. That otherwise, like I wouldn't know them. It'd be kind of lonely. And
Yeah.
here, there's like a community I can be like, oh my god, a guest said they had a great stay, and they wrote us a 4-star review. Like, and you can just tweet that. But like, absent Twitter, like how can I? There's no outlet for that.
Right.
Or absent some sort of form of social media. So for me, like that's pretty fun. And then I don't know, like I think that's the main benefit I've gotten is I found it entertaining and fun.
Yeah, I tell people, I'm like, listen, if you're curious about it and you're fired up to learn more about it and you want to learn in public or you want to share what you're learning, like just do it without any sort of outcome in mind. Just do it because you're interested in
Yeah,
it and you'll see what it turns into. And I'm like, you don't have to have 30,000 followers to benefit from Twitter. You'll meet
yeah,
people within your sphere and industry and realm and just form a little mini community that you'll benefit from. It's kind of like when you go to an
yeah,
industry conference and you're like, wow, there's a lot of people that do what I'm doing. But when you're just like at
yeah.
home, you think you're the only one in the world that like here trying to figure this out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. Like, and I think what's cool about it is like you can professionally benefit from it just by sharing what you know,
Yeah.
and then people will be like, oh, in this area, like if I ever need a lender, this person's just talked about it so much, and they clearly know what they're talking about. Like they look that person up, and that person is not necessarily like needing to really. They're not like super marketing themselves. They're just sharing what they know. But it is, I think, like for a lot of professions, a good way to just get it out there, that you
100%.
exist, and in a way that like people actually like hearing about. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool. Like, but for me, it's like, it's just, mostly fun. So
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm curious. So for you, do you have a newsletter? Are you growing that intentionally? Do you just share things? 'Cause I think I've read blogs where you're like, here are some tips about short-term rentals.
Before I got into Twitter, I had a blog or have a blog where I was like, oh, maybe I'll just create like an online resource about this, about everything I know. And I just kind of lost interest in it. Like in prior sort of professional lives, like I've done more blogging and things like that. And it's a lot of work versus just like sending off a tweet that's sort of like half baked. That might take 30 seconds. And so I think I just mostly like put it on there. Like kind of for fun, I turned on like, you can like paid subscribe to my feed.
I saw that.
And I kind of just I was like, well, would anyone sign up for that? Like $9, and people do. And I don't know, it's just like a smaller community that I'll like post more like the actual bad stuff that's happening or like property by property level things. Whereas I try to be pretty transparent on my main feed, but I also don't want to like post the economics of like how this one property is doing well or poorly. Whereas on like a smaller group of like people that have subscribed and are friendly, I can post stuff without worrying about getting like tweet dunked on or whatever it is. So I'd say like that's the only extent to which I have like a newsletter is that. And yeah, it's been like really fun so far.
Yeah, it's funny. It's true. Now my audience has gotten, I'm not saying it's huge, but it's gotten big enough where I'll tweet something, one person takes it the wrong way, and it turns into like this firestorm of insults. And I'm just like, guys, like this is not what I meant.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like you kind of, anything like out there is gonna, I mean, even if it's behind a paywall, it can be taken out of context. So
it's pretty wild, but I definitely think there's asymmetry to the upside to be sharing what you're sharing, learning in public, and showing people, what you're interested in. Because what I realize is like then you find other people that are interested in what you're interested in, and then you can have these conversations. Like on my DMs, I've got tons of conversations with people like trying to invest in Miami multifamily, visiting, reaching out, and I'm like, this is great. They're interested in what I'm interested in. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
That's great.
So I guess I want to end it more on a personal note. I guess I'll ask you first one question. What haven't we talked about, or what haven't I asked you that you'd want sort of the audience to know about Rohin?
No, I live in San Francisco, and I wouldn't have to live here. I think like all the stuff people read about in the news or see in the news is by and large accurate, but it's also like a place of great opportunity. And I kind of like living here, and I think that's gone from being like, of course you like living in San Francisco, it's a really cool city, to being like, whoa, you live in San Francisco, that's very weird. But for the most part, like we raised 2 kids here, we like bought a home here this year, like we've settled down in here and think it's like a pretty great place, despite having obvious drawbacks too. So
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I am guilty of just obviously like pushing Miami because I love it so much. And I read the headlines of San Francisco and the homelessness and the robbery and all that stuff. And obviously it's awful, but I'm sure like only the worst things sort of float up to me. But I have heard clients say like, hey, Omar, if you go to San Francisco, like it's still San Francisco. There's still people working there, like talent's there, jobs are there. I guess, let's talk a little bit about San Francisco, because clearly you're in the market and, you just bought a house recently. Have prices, I just don't know, right? So I'm asking, have prices gone down in the residential space because of the sentiment where you now say, hey, there's an opportunity to buy here? Or is the residential...
I don't know if there's like an investment opportunity. But, for us personally, it was like 2023. And it was like, oh, we could never buy a place here before because everyone had so much money that they'd like waive all contingencies, buy it all cash. So you just couldn't get in the door. And then all of a sudden, like things kind of slowed down, and like a person that couldn't waive all the contingencies, couldn't buy all cash, to kind of get an offer accepted. So that like by itself like presents some opportunity if you were like on the sidelines because you didn't have like an IPO event. So. And it's probably like that in Miami now. Like maybe it wasn't like that before, and now there's been this like period of like everyone's coming in with so much money, and like you can't, maybe it's not because there's more construction there, but like
no, you're 100%
for like as long as I lived, it was just like impossible to get an offer accepted. And we weren't making offers because we were focused on the short-term rental business, but like that's presented one option, one opportunity.
Yeah.
The other is that like most of San Francisco is like pretty nice, and it is like, and the parts that are like kind of you see about in the news were always like that way. That now it's just like more severe, I think. And so that's why I think all the stuff you see in the news is by and large accurate, and it is sort of spreading throughout. But not to the extent to which like it's captured on the news. But I think it is like I think it's a fair point. But even still, like most of it is like, this is like a pretty cool, walkable, fun city. You meet like great people. But I think that the most important point about it is like, I think there was like a time in the pandemic where the city could have really lost the whole tech industry. Like all the big companies kind of shut down their offices. Everyone was like, well, we can just work remotely. Right. But like somehow I think the city, like the next generation of tech companies decided to like locate here for some reason, which I don't really 100% know went on behind it. But like OpenAI, like maybe that's the next like big $1 trillion company, and that's like in San Francisco, signed the biggest lease in 5 years. Like Y Combinator, which mints like $1 billion companies every year. They were in Mountain View, the heart of Silicon Valley, where Google is, and they moved to San Francisco. So now they're going to be dumping just dumping $1 billion companies onto the market in San Francisco. And so the next decade of like economic growth in the tech industry is like going to be here, I think. And then that's not to say there won't also be other places, but like you very easily could have seen how everyone was just not going to be here. And I think that's one thing I have a lot of conviction about, that it switched. And I don't know why, but like, all the big AI companies or at least a bunch of notable ones are like deciding to be here, and that there's going to be some sort of like next 10-year tech boom that will drive up prices of something. Maybe I don't know if like I would invest like in commercial real estate here, but that's not like my area of expertise. But I felt confident enough to like participate in a small piece of the residential pie by sort of putting down roots here. So.
For sure. No, and I have clients that are actually now thinking about San Francisco for the first time, because they're saying, hey, on the commercial side, $50, $100 million buildings. And they're saying on a relative basis, this is still one of the major cities in the US, and pricing is so much better than it's been historically in San Francisco. So they're flirting with the idea of making, big acquisitions over there, which I find interesting. And I think you're 100% right. AI definitely looks like it's going to be the future. And I remember seeing a map of like all the AI companies in San Francisco, and there was tons and tons and tons of them. In Miami, I think there's like 2 relatively successful ones. And mind you, like nowhere near OpenAI, but just like actually has like hard tech, really smart people in Miami doing it. But, San Francisco still has 100x the talent and the job opportunities for it. So I'm just as bullish. I've actually never visited. I'm going to go in early February for the first time, and very fortunately,
hopefully we can meet up.
I was going to say I'll definitely reach out, and I hope that a lot of the people that I've met through Twitter, that a lot of them are from San Francisco, some of them which have moved to Miami, are going to give me enough hospitality that I'm going to be like, San Francisco's amazing. What are all these people talking about? But
cool.
no, it's been a good time.
Yeah, and I'm not like such a bull on it. Like, we could live anywhere, and if it was like not great, we wouldn't live here. But I think like the people are great. Like it attracts really great people, like the universities, like it gets smart people, it gets engineers, like it gets scientists, and I think a lot of those people, for some reason, that like, maybe they share like of it, or like I do, or maybe they just have some other reason, but they've sort of moved here. So
no, I think that's a big driver. It's, if birds of a feather flock together, they say. So like if you're a really ambitious, smart, academically sort of proficient type person, you want to be around that community. I'm very fortunate to have met some of these very successful Silicon Valley, San Francisco migrants into Miami. And I'm like blown away by how smart they are. Like I think they don't realize how smart they are. And I'm not saying they're all geniuses, but I'm like, man, your brain just works really, really fast. And you just process information in such an analytical, like coherent way. It's phenomenal. And I tell them, I'm like, the conversation we're having right now, I would have never imagined myself having in Miami, like over dinner. The other day, it was like 2 days ago, I was in my elevator and I'm just waiting to go up to my floor. And there's these 2 guys talking about LLM and ChatGPT wraps products. And I'm just like, whoa, guys. I'm like, I don't know where y'all are from, but this is amazing that this is happening in my elevator right now. So I could imagine how, people love being around other people that are just as smart in a community within San Fran. And I'm sure that's going to continue being the case over a longer period of time.
Well, yeah, hopefully.
Amazing. Well, Rohin, I will definitely reach out when I'm there in February so we can get together in person. Maybe I'll even swing by an Airbnb of yours.
Cool. Yeah, we're welcome anytime. So
thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye.